begin a brand new series this week. It's called Flip. And I'm excited about it because today, July 30th, marks my 2-year anniversary here at Newday. It's been 2 years since Tiffany, Noah, and I have come, and now we have Harper alongside with us. And we're excited to be in a church community celebrating that. There's something about the church that really needs to be understood, I think, after COVID. There's something about the church at large, the capital C church, that I think is so important to be understood. And that's why we're starting this series right now. The one thing we learned about church after COVID is that information is not enough for transformation. Information about God isn't enough for transformation towards the person God has designed you to be. What we learned during COVID is that you can preach online. You can get information online. You can even get celebration online. You could have the praise music, and I remember all churches were saying, if you're in your living room, stand up and praise God. I know most of you sat down and ate ice cream. We can even celebrate online. But the one thing online is not sufficient for is deep, intimate, authentic community. That is irreplaceable. You cannot truly connect digitally. We can we can converse. I did go to school, please help me. We can chat, we can talk, we can check each other out, see how things are, but something happens when we are together. That togetherness is transformational. And I believe the church, if the capital C church is going to survive this next generation, we must create environments where deep, authentic, spiritual community exists. If the church is going to survive the next generation, it must show up in the everyday lives of real people. And when I say the church, I mean you and I. Because we are the church. We are the church. From the time I was 17, I sensed God's calling over my life. And that calling was really around speaking and proclaiming and preaching. But with that calling, there was this sense in me that something different must exist in church. That people long for something greater, bigger, better than just a place to come and listen to someone else talk. At the age of 21, I heard God say to me, I want you to create a place where people can know the kind of God I've been to you. And man, he's been an awesome God. In my life, I've experienced him to be a God who is truly loving, radical love, love that goes beyond your cute, pretty, nice, I like the way you do this love. Love that says, I understand the depths of your brokenness and I yearn for you, not just accept you. That's the kind of God he's been to me. So naturally, when I became a church leader, I realized that part of that love, part of that understanding, part of my calling was to create places where people can experience that kind of God. And that's why I said yes to Newday. Because I believed when I looked at our values and I looked at our mission and I looked at where we've been, I believe this church had the DNA to be the type of church where people can experience deep, authentic, spiritual community that is centered around Jesus. And today, as we start this new series, I realize, well, how can we become this church? How can people experience this church? How can people get to know people in that way? And I realize the only way to do it is one person at a time. It only starts one person at a time. When we think of church as leaders, when we think of church, when we think of organizations or companies, you're trying to change the world. And the reality is the world is only changed one person at a time. And so today, our series, Flip, speaks on the power of discipling relationships. In the secular world, you would call it mentoring relationships. The power of discipling relationships, that one life can flip the life of another. One person can create lasting change in the life of someone else. Imagine with me if you understood that each person sitting next to you is a conduit for goodness. That each person around you, each person as part of this community is a conduit for life change, for transforming the world, that each and every one of us have impact beyond ourselves. And if we understood that, watch me, if we understood that, could it be that if I do for one person what I want to do for the world, that I am changing the world? If I could do for one person what I want to do for the world, I am changing the world. Because if they are a conduit for goodness, whatever I pour into one person will eventually flow to all. In the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at relationships and stories who connect that way. Stories of mentoring relationships, discipling relationships. Today, we're looking at Mordecai and Esther. Mordecai, one of the most powerful stories in the entire scriptures, one of the most profound stories in all of scripture. We don't have time to go through the ins and outs and all the amazing parts of this, I was going to say movie because it is a great movie too, but of this narrative, we don't have all the time to go through it, but the one thing I want you to leave out here today with is this. Each of us need a Mordecai. Every single one of us need a Mordecai. And watch. You are one Mordecai away from greatness. You are only one Mordecai away from being the person God designed you to be, from fulfilling the purpose that he placed for you on earth. You are one Mordecai away from greatness. One Mordecai away from greatness. If you were in the church that I grew up in, you would hear the preacher say something like this. Say to your neighbor, you are one Mordecai away from greatness. And I used to be annoyed because I don't want to talk to my neighbor. Why are you telling me to talk to my neighbor? And I realized the reason why the preacher would say that is so that you could say it and your mind could believe it. Because when we hear it audibly, it makes a difference. And then I realized that the trick of the narrative is that when you hear someone else say it to you, you start believing it. So why don't you try it with me? Say, neighbor, you are one Mordecai away from greatness. All right. Let's get into the story. We're in Esther chapter 4. and I believe it'll show up on your screen. Esther 4. And here's what it says in verse 12. Esther 4, verse 12. It says, so Esther's words were reported to Mordecai. Esther's words were reported to Mordecai. Next one. He sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. And for those of you who are just coming into this story, you might be thinking, okay, where is this coming from? So let me set the stage a little bit for you. If you've never read this, if you've never heard about this story, it's found in the book of Esther. It's in the Old Testament, and it's really profound. It's the only book in all the Old Testament that has not one single mention of God. Not one single mention of God. But it's so clear God's all over that thing. It's so clear. So the part in the story we're just getting to is that someone has decided that they want to get rid of the Jews. He's a pretty important guy. He's really just upset. He's upset about one person, really. His name is Mordecai. And the reason why he's upset is because he feels like he's a pretty important guy, and Mordecai doesn't respect that. In fact, every time he goes around town, everyone's saying, hey, how you doing? Oh, my. And Mordecai looks at him like, what's up, dude? And he gets pretty upset about that. He finds out Mordecai's Jewish, and he's like, it's not enough that I'm going to get rid of this guy. I'm going to get rid of everyone. He creates this edict throughout all the empire. Now, the empire goes from India to Ethiopia. This is vast territory. And throughout all this empire, it says, if you find a Jew on March 7 of next year, you have the right to get rid of them and take their house. I mean, this is pretty mind-blowing. This is historic. Mordecai gets wind of this, hears this, and he remembers that he had a mentoring relationship with this girl named Hadassah, who is now called Esther. She is his cousin, and she lost her parents, and he took her in and mentored her and showed her how to go about life. She's in the position of queen of this empire because Mordecai heard that there was a big competition happening in town for the next queen. Now, we won't get to the story of how we got to there. That's a very nice, interesting story if you have some time to read a really cool book. Esther is your book. So she becomes queen because Mordecai says to her, here's what you do. Everything she needs to know, he tells her. He sets her up for success to the point where now she is queen. And the reason why she's queen is because of all the women that shows up, she's the only one that stands out to the queen. And you've got to recognize that's because of Mordecai's mentorship. If it's not for Mordecai, she doesn't stand out. She's raised by Mordecai in such a way that it's not just her beauty, but her intellect, her charisma, everything about her. When she shows up in a room, people go, something is different about this woman. That's the power of a mentoring relationship. I am where I am today because of mentoring relationships. I wouldn't be the person I am today without mentoring relationships. Because let's get it right. Let's get it straight. Let's be real with ourselves. Some of us come from broken homes. Some of us come from dysfunctional relationships. And God, by his mercy and grace, exposes us to different realities than what we were raised in. And I was one of those people. If it wasn't for people around me that showed me a different way, I would think that life is only this way from my brokenness. But there are people who saw something in me, who took time to pour into me, and because they poured into me, you benefit from my leadership. I've been able to go all around the world in different places, and I've had opportunities to impact the world in crazy, radical ways because of teachers who didn't give up on me. Because of leaders who said, this guy has something, and even though everyone else is saying he's trouble, they realized that I could create good trouble. And they poured into me. Esther is queen because Mordecai took the time to pour into her life. Everything she needed to know, he taught her. Everything she needed to understand, he told her. When she was struggling with this or struggling with that, she went to him and he listened. And how do we know? Because in chapter 2 it says, when Mordecai says, here's what you're going to do. You're going to get into the palace. You're going to say, you're not going to tell anybody that you're Jewish because they're not ready for that yet. Calm down. One day they're going to find out. Today's not the day. It says in chapter 2, verse 7, it says that she does everything Mordecai tells her just as it was her custom. So that's not the first time she's listening to him. The power of mentoring relationships comes from people who are able to take in someone else's influence. If you're not teachable, you're not going anywhere. Woo, woo. I don't know if you have time for this one. If people can't speak into your life, you're not going anywhere in life. Did you hear what I just said? If you can't accept other people going, here's what I see in you, but you're not living up to it. You need to live up to what I see in you. If you can't take accountability, you're not going anywhere. Now, I'm just going to be honest with you. Because I come from brokenness, accountability sounds like inadequacy to me. Can I be honest? Is it okay? Is it okay if I share? This is the part I wish I had talked to my wife about. Because in so many areas of my life growing up, all I heard was negativity. I have negativity receptors. I expect negativity. I struggle with positivity. And someone can say, Jose, you're doing this, this, and that. Guess what? The only thing I will leave with is the one negative thing you said. This whole room can come and go, that was a really good sermon, Pastor. That was so important. One person goes, Marie didn't like the way you said that about that verse. The rest of the night, I'm going over the verse. What did I miss? And what I've had to learn, I'm trying to teach you, what I've had to learn is that the only way I grow is to learn to accept the criticism, but remember the praise. Accept the criticism, but remember the praise. And I'm not talking about the praise from the people, the praise from your God. Remember who God said you are. Criticism does not take away your identity in Jesus. And because Esther is the type of person who's learned that she is because God has made her, and no one will take that away from her, she's able to receive criticism that doesn't shut her down, but activates her greatness. Watch what happens. Esther now says to Mordecai, Mordecai says, hey, Esther, you're a queen. Go to the king because they said they're going to destroy all the Jews. Go to the king and ask the king to stop this nonsense. Esther goes, whoa, buddy, let's calm down. Calm down. Let me remind you what kind of kingdom we're in. Number one, even though I'm the queen, unless the king sends for me, I can't go. He'll kill me. That's one. Number two, let's remember, in this kingdom, once the king signs it, even the king can't take it away. So you're basically asking me to go and die. No good. No bueno. Let's stick to your first conversation about, let's not let anybody else know I'm Jewish. Let's stick to plan A. So she basically says to Mordecai, sorry, no can do, and she moves on. So Mordecai sends back this answer. Imagine getting this email. Go back. Per our conversation, do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. Don't think that just because no one knows you're Jewish and you're living in the palace, that somehow everyone else will die, but it doesn't affect you. It doesn't bother you. It's not your problem. Guess what? Look what will happen. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. Woo! That's a good sermon for another day. But you and your father's family will perish. You and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Woo. Mordecai says, with or without you, God will deliver us. In this passage, we get a glimpse of Mordecai's mentoring relationship with Esther. Mordecai first reminds her who her God is. God has a million ways to solve one problem. He can use you. He wants to use you. He does not have to use you. God's going to deliver us with or without you. You might as well join in. This is what I love. Ooh, I love it. I love it because it doesn't matter what it is in our world, in our families, in our homes, in our churches, in organizations. As we look at our country, we often think that God is running out of options. If it's not this person, we don't know what you have to be the person that does it. Guess what? You don't have to be anything because it's a privilege for God to even use you. God has ways to deal with things outside of you. He is giving you the first option. So he reminds her of who God is. And every one of us need a Mordecai that reminds us of God's greatness. We need people in our lives that when we're faced with trouble, when we're faced with challenges, when we're faced with difficulties, there's someone that reminds us, hey, you've been here before. Here's what God has done. God will do it again. Each of us need a Mordecai. It doesn't matter how long you've been leading. It doesn't matter how long you've been parenting. It doesn't matter how long you've been married. There will come a point in your life you need someone else to speak into your life. It doesn't matter how long. You're going to need someone to remind you, hey, remember why you got married. You're going to need someone to remind you, hey, remember why you entered leadership. You're going to need someone to remind you, hey, I know it's been rough, but we've been here before. You're a great mom. You're a great dad. God has brought you through this before. All of us need, do you hear the word I said? Need. This is not an option. All of us need a Mordecai. All of us. He reminds her that God will deliver. Then he reminds her of her purpose. Every one of us need a Mordecai to remind us that we have God-given purpose. Hey, you're not at the palace just for you. It could be that the whole reason why you're there was for this moment. You're in the position that you're in for us. You're where you are because you have divine purpose. God didn't just let you get in there. He had an intention in mind when you're there. You are there because this time, this moment is calling for your leadership. He reminds her, this is who God is. This is who you are. And God has a purpose for your life. Every one of us need a Mordecai. And I don't know about you, but when someone speaks this kind of truth into our lives, who knows that, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this, when that kind of truth is spoken into your life, it perks you up. It reminds you, hey, I'm not alone here. I'm not going through this by myself. And let me tell you, if you're a Christian, if you're a believer, Christians, we recognize this one thing, that you cannot do Christianity by yourself. It's impossible. You can't do it by yourself. Most of us recognize we can't do life by ourselves. But Christianity, following Jesus, that requires community. We can't do it by ourselves. And so right now, what I'm hoping you're thinking, what I'm hoping you're hoping for, is for God to send you a Mordecai. Over the next few weeks, you're going to be hearing about an opportunity we have here at Newday as we seek to be the kind of church that not only exists today, but exists tomorrow. To be the church that's relevant to not only this generation, but to the next generation. To be the kind of church where you can find real, deep, authentic community. We're going to be making a call, giving you an opportunity to perhaps find your Mordecai. And what I want you to start doing this week is I want you to start praying, God, send me my Mordecai. I want you to start thinking about that. And then there are those of you on this journey who you've had incredible Mordecai Esther relationships. You've had them. When I'm preaching, you're nodding your head because you can think of your Mordecai and you're like, man, if it wasn't for my Mordecai, I wouldn't be in my marriage. If it wasn't for my Mordecai, I wouldn't still be here. If I wasn't for my Mordecai, I wouldn't still be parenting. If it wasn't for my Mordecai, I wouldn't be. Some of you, you're in this room right now, you've had that. And perhaps God is calling you to now be a Mordecai to someone else. And so I want you to start praying, God. Who can I be? Who can I be a Mordecai to? Listen to what happens right here. Watch this. Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Whoo! Whoo! If I die, I die. But I am not shrinking from this moment. I will not just stay silent. I will not think of the consequences and let the consequences determine my destiny. That kind of strength, that kind of boldness, that kind of power comes from a mentoring relationship. If Esther didn't have a Mordecai, Jewish history today would look different. The world would be different if she didn't have a Mordecai. If she didn't have a Mordecai, our nations would look different. Humanity would look different if she didn't have a Mordecai. All it took was one Mordecai to get her name in the books of the Torah. It took one Mordecai for her name to be spoken about today It took one Mordecai for her to reach her greatness. It took one Mordecai for God's purposes to be fulfilled. You and I are one Mordecai away from greatness. Each of us need a Mordecai.